Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Boaz here. Welcome to Daily Power Parsha. Today is Thursday, April 15th. I think this used to be tax day back once upon a time, but I think it's a bit different this year. Nonetheless, Thursday, April 15th, 2021. The portion this week is the double portion Tazria-Metzora, and we are going to jump into the epic fifth reading of the double reading. So I'm going to share my screen and let's jump right in. Okay, here we go. So this is Leviticus chapter 14, and we start with verse 21. Now this is, just to refresh the memory, this is still discussing the protocol for the ritual of the purification ritual from a person when a person has finished experiencing tzarat. So the Metzora, the one who had tzarat, upon the disappearance of said lesion, Himark. So when the tzarat lesion goes away, so then there's a process, day 1 process, a day 7 process, a day 8 process, right, which involves shaving the hair and bringing sacrifices and mikvah and cleansing clothing, etc. And we said yesterday that on day number 8, so there's the 7-day period, and then the day afterwards, day 8, there's a whole slew of offerings that are brought. But here the Torah says that if the person cannot afford the animal offerings, there's another option, and that's what we're going to deal with today. But if he is poor and cannot afford these sacrifices, and if you remember, there was a bunch of animals. So, animals are costly. So the Torah says, if he cannot afford it, he shall take 1 male lamb as a guilt offering for a waving to effect atonement for him, and 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil as a meal offering, and a log of oil, and 2 turtle doves or 2 young doves, according to what he can afford. One shall be a sin offering and one a burnt offering. So instead of, I think I recall from yesterday, maybe 3 animals, now it's an animal and 2 birds, right? So you see what happened there? In order to make it a little bit more cost efficient, or let's just use a real word, to make it more affordable for the fellow who cannot afford the animals, the 3 animals. So here we have an option to do 2 animals and 2 birds. So you have a lamb and either 2 turtle doves or 2 young doves. And of course the meal offering, but that's the same for both. Let's go to verse 23. And he shall bring them on the 8th day, like we said before, the 8th day of his cleansing, to the Kohen, to the entrance of the tent of meeting before the Lord. So again, it's outside in that kind of open air temple courtyard area, in front of the building that was covered, in which was the menorah and the incense altar and the showbread table and the Holy of Holies in the innermost chamber. So right outside that building, that's where this offering was brought. Let's continue verse 24. And the Kohen shall take the guilt offering lamb and the log of oil, and the Kohen shall wave them as a waving, up, down, forward, back, before the Lord. Just want to share something regarding the wave offering. This is not the wave that you would do in a stadium. You know that wave? This is the wave offering, up, down, forward, back, which according to Kabbalah signifies different elements in our relationship. So in our relationship with God, there might be ups and downs. The point is, whether we're feeling excited, whether we're not feeling so excited, we are dedicated to God and what we need to be doing. That is the significance of the wave offering, going up and down. Forward and back means in our relationships, we need to be drawn close as well as create boundaries. We have to do, and we have to love and do and respect and not do in a healthy relationship. So the wave offering, the up, down, forward, back, which we found by many offerings, is symbolic of the various permutations of movement and energy that our lives consist of. Let's continue back inside verse 25. And he shall slaughter the guilt offering lamb And the Kohen shall take some of the blood of the guilt offering and place it on the cartilage of the right ear of the person being cleansed, and the thumb of his right hand, and the big toe of his right foot. As we said yesterday, the blood goes on the ear, the thumb, and the toe, the big toe of the right side of the body. And the Kohen, this is similar to what we said yesterday, the Kohen shall then pour some of the oil into the left palm of the Kohen, and the Kohen shall sprinkle with his right finger some of the oil that is in his left palm 7 times before the Lord toward the holy space. And the Kohen shall place some of the oil that is in his palm. Remember, some oil was mixed with the meal offering, but the remainder of the oil he poured some in his palm, sprinkled it, and then he placed some of that oil from his palm on the cartilage of the right ear of the person being cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot, on the place of the blood of the guilt offering. So as we said yesterday, the first round of liquid placement on the ear, cartilage, thumb, and big toe on the right side was blood, and the second layer was oil. And what is left over from the oil that is in the Kohen's palm, he shall place upon the head of the person being cleansed to effect atonement for him before the Lord. He shall then perform the service of one of the turtle doves or of the young doves from whatever he can afford. From what he can afford, one is a sin offering and one is a burnt offering besides the meal offering, and the Kohen shall effect atonement for the person being cleansed before the Lord. This is the law of one in whom there is a lesion of tzarat, one who cannot afford the full array of sacrifices when he is to be cleansed. And it's a short reading today, and essentially it's the same core protocol as we discussed yesterday, with the 3 different types of offerings, and with the blood and the blood placement and the oil and the sprinkling and the oil placement. The only difference is that today, instead of 3 different animals, we have 1 animal and 2 birds to make it a little bit more affordable. Okay, so that is the reading for today. What I'd like to do, though.
I already have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
This last part is all about somebody who can't afford.
Right.
But I was just thinking, for example, some of the people who are homeless around Chabad and all that.
Yeah.
You said, "Bring me a lamb." They look at you like you're from Mars.
Right.
I mean, the money for it.
I don't believe that there were homeless back in the times of the temple. I'm gonna give a hot take, and I don't believe that typically in Jewish communities there was a thing of homelessness. I believe that there was a very strong social network where people had a place and they had family or they had friends or there were community safety nets where if somebody needed something, they could do it. What we're talking about here is somebody who can't afford it and maybe doesn't want to borrow, maybe doesn't want to loan, maybe doesn't want to give. And so there's another option right now today in which there's a serious problem of poverty that's not being addressed. One could argue and say, our course Judaism Skips the World, where we said basically that the idea of social responsibility originates with Torah. It's a Jewish idea. The world didn't have a notion of social responsibility. Maybe it had an idea of, communal responsibility, maybe, but not even really. I mean, you look at the ancient great civilizations, they were not taking care of their own. They didn't care of their own, right? They didn't care about their own. But global responsibility, certainly not. Judaism has a radical take on social responsibility, starting from Abraham. Abraham teaches his family tzedakah u'mishpat. Tzedakah meaning charity, giving, social responsibility. Abraham is told about Sodom being destroyed, and Abraham says, not so fast. Doesn't know them, doesn't have any, well, I guess his nephew was there, but otherwise doesn't have much skin in the game, and nonetheless, he goes to bat for them. So the idea is social responsibility, which Judaism takes to the extreme. It's certainly not practiced in our communities, in our American communities. Homelessness is a major problem. And you're right. You go to someone on the streets and say, hey, you need to bring a lamb. They'll be like, what are you talking about? I would say this whole ritual would be completely foreign to them, right? Not only because we don't have a temple and it's not applicable today, but even the concept of something like being mindful of your skin's appearance as a spiritual sign to take care of it, that doesn't begin when somebody is struggling for just basic survival on a day-to-day basis. So these laws are clearly given in a completely different context, in a completely different societal structure, which I think has a lot of pros to it. There's a lot of advantages of the type of society that Torah is speaking of. In this society, though, you have people that have more or less money. And even if they're not on the streets, they just maybe can't afford right now 3 animals as a sacrifice. So there is an allowance for a less expensive version of the offering, which is not so uncommon. We've had that before with some other offerings. With the Ola offering, the burnt offering, you could bring it from cattle, from sheep or goats. You could bring it from birds. You could bring a meal offering as an Ola. So there are different options based on one's means. The Rebbe points out there's something interesting, a bit of a contradiction along these lines. It says, what if a poor person says, you know what, I'm going to take responsibility and cover the offerings for a such and such who is a Metzora, who needs to be cleansed and purified. I'm going to take care of the offerings. And that person is wealthy, and this person is not wealthy. So the question is, which offering is brought? The poor man's offering or the standard issue, right? So again, the person who needs the process done is a person of means. But a poor person stepped up and said, I'm going to cover it. So do they pay based on their means, or do they go based on because they're the ones that are paying for it, or is it done based on the means of the one to whom the purification is being applied? Does that make sense? So Rambam Maimonides rules that that the poor man who offers to bring the offering on behalf of the rich man has to bring the rich man's offering. Next time, don't make a silly offer like that, or don't make an offer like that, because, right, you're on the hook for the full offering because it's being brought on behalf of that guy. But if the reverse is true, if a rich man says, I'll sponsor the offering for a poor Metzora, for a poor man who got tzarat, he brings the rich man's offering.
He does?
He does. That's the logical contradiction. But Rambam rules that when it's the poor man who pledges for the rich man, he brings the rich man's offering. When it's the rich man pledging for the poor man, he also brings the rich man's offering. So you would think, one second, if the poor man has to bring the rich man's offering, clearly it's because it doesn't go based on the payer, it goes based on the one who needs the purification, based on their status. But if that's the case, then why, when the rich man pledges on behalf of the poor man, so you would think he would only buy and sponsor the poor man because it's for the poor guy, so it would be on his level. No, it's the rich man's offering. The Rebbe has a very elaborate talk on this, an analysis of the contradiction, because clearly it's a contradiction. Because in both cases, you're basically doing the more expensive route. The poor man has to pay for the rich guy, and the rich guy has to pay for the poor guy, but they both have to pay the full amount. And the logic is contradictory. The Rebbe says, interestingly, there's different dimensions when it comes to purification of the Metzora. There's, first of all, how at all can one sponsor the offerings for someone else, how does that even make sense? So that's based on the idea, the principle that we are all guarantors for each other. Kol Yisrael arevim zeh lazeh. We are all responsible for each other, and not only responsible and intertwined, but guarantors, which means that like a loan, like a guarantor on a loan. So if the borrower defaults on a loan, so whoever signed the guarantee, they're now schlepped in on it. They thought they were just putting their name down because that's never going to happen. Well, look what just happened. You get hauled in, and now you're responsible. So the Mishnah says, or the Talmud, I forget where the quote originates from, Kol Yisrael arevim zeh lazeh, that all Israel, all Jews are guarantors for one another, which means one person can step in on behalf of the other. And yet, as they step in, there are different elements to it. One is the idea of my representation of them, and then there's the idea of the cleansing for that person. So on the level of my stepping in, you would say if the man is poor and he's pledging on behalf of the rich man, but he's poor, so that would be for him, his representation. But on the level of the fellow's atonement, objectively, that has to be done. Well, that has to be done on his level, so you bring the rich man's offering. Conversely, the rich man who brings it on behalf of the poor man. So to effect the atonement for the poor man, you would only need a poor man's offering. But to step in as a guarantor to represent yourself, you need to bring the rich man's offering. So since there are two elements, we got you coming and we got you going, but either way, you're going to pony up for the animals, my friend. You are not going to get away with an animal and two birds in both of these cases. But either way, without getting, again, I'm not doing justice to the talk, but really the point is that since there are two parties, right? Since there are two people, the one who needs it done and the one who's doing it on their behalf, and they're both kind of intertwined, so you basically go by the max of both parties. And so you got to do the rich man's offering when it's the poor for the rich, and when it's the rich for the poor, again, the rich man's offering, because in both those cases, one of the parties has the means, and therefore, for one of those two elements, it needs to be done on that level. All right, be that as it may, but I think the beautiful thing that comes up is the overall idea that one can bring an offering on behalf of someone else, and it's legit, and it's kosher, and it achieves atonement for them. That's an amazing thing. But that speaks to the same idea, Mark, that you brought up, which is why I brought it up, because you reminded me of this, which is the idea of social responsibility. So your question was, what if somebody, it's not even in their frame of reference, and that's true. And our calling is to make sure that we never get to that place, that our society never gets to that place where at most it's somebody stepping in for someone, or somebody only being able to afford, the less expensive model as opposed to the more expensive, when I say model, I mean type of offerings, but not to the point where it's totally off the radar. That's what we're striving to prevent. And we're all guarantors for each other, which means that it's not, what a guarantor, the cool thing about this analogy of a guarantor is that my own, if I sign on someone else's loan, then my financial, what's the word I'm looking for? My financial stability is out of my hands at this point. It's not only based on my decisions, it's not based on this guy's decisions, because if he decides to totally blow that thing up, then I'm now on the hook. So my stability, my financial reality is tied, my fate financially is tied to their fate. And that's exactly, I think, the beauty of this teaching, that we're all guarantors for each other. That means I can be the greatest tzaddik. Let's move away from money for a second. I could be a tzaddik and pious and spiritual and whatnot and wonderful. But if someone else, is struggling, then it's my struggle as well. We're not disconnected from each other to the point that what happens with one is completely irrelevant to me. It is relevant, and it affects us it changes us, and it's important that we pay attention to it. So I guess one of the takeaways from today is this idea, to quote a COVID cliche, we're all in this together. But we mean it more sincerely than that, right? We're all in this together. Yeah, I noticed who put up, whatever. I'm not going to speak negatively. I'm sure it came from a good place, but nonetheless, the question is it just about a sign, or is it a real feeling? Along these lines, a story that I love about Mashiach, which ties into our course starting next week on Mashiach. So there's a story about a great mystic who lived in Israel. And one day there was a rumor that Mashiach had come. This is before Twitter and WhatsApp and other forms of Snapchat and social media and Instagram. So word traveled, but not as fast as it does today. So there was a rumor that Mashiach had come because somebody sounded the shofar from one of the mountaintops in Israel. And so it was like, oh, maybe Mashiach, we're not sure yet. So the rumor hit this great rabbi's room, his office. Somebody came in and said, the rumor is Mashiach is here. So the rabbi walks over to his window, opens it up, puts his head outside, does the sniff test, smells outside, and says, no, Mashiach has not come. Or Mashiach has not come. And he closed the window and he dispelled the rumor. So I believe the Rebbe asked the question on this story. And the Rebbe asked the following question. Why did the rabbi have to go to the window to smell to see if Mashiach had come? Wouldn't he have smelled it in his room? Why did he have to open the window? Like, why didn't he just smell around himself and see, if Mashiach had come or not? The Rebbe answered, because in his room, in his space, Mashiach had already come. In other words, it was already a messianic energy, a spiritual energy. The question is, in the outside world, did it also affect there? In the last discourse, I'm not done yet. I have one more piece to this puzzle that I've just created. So in the very last discourse that the Rebbe edited and handed out shortly before his stroke in 1992, it was a discourse in honor of Purim Katan, which is in a year that has 2 Adars. So you celebrate Purim, the second Adar, but the first Adar, the 14th day of the first Adar, so it's not Purim. We call it Purim Katan, which is, I don't know, what do you do on Purim Katan? You have a meal and you think, oh, in a month, we're going to celebrate Purim. It's like a mini whatever. Okay, so the Rebbe handed out edited and handed out this discourse in conjunction with that day, Purim Katan, in the year 1992. And in that discourse, the Rebbe writes the following. The Rebbe said, and it's written the following. I'm paraphrasing. He says that even if by you it's Mashiach, in other words, it's good, spiritually good, if by someone else it's not as good, or it's not good at all, or it's not where it needs to be, then by you there's also something missing. In other words, it can't really just be a personal redemption. Yeah, well, I got Mashiach, I got spirituality, I got my connection with God. To me, God is real, and we're like this, so whatever's going on out there, not my issue. That's not the case. Kol Yisrael Arevim Zelazeh. We're all guarantors and connected with each other. So as one goes, we all go. Or as we all go, one goes. I guess that would probably be more the more apt description in this context, right? If the world is not yet in that perfected state, then by us, it's also not by us, by even an individual who otherwise might say, oh, everything's good, it's not good. So if one person is suffering, if one person physically or spiritually, if one person feels disconnected or feels disenfranchised, if that's the right word, then it also affects us. We are guarantors on that loan, so to speak. If they're struggling, then we are automatically struggling as well. And I don't want to make it like us versus them. We are all us and we are all them. There's no other in this case. We're all literally in the same space. So as there's any challenge out there, it's the challenge for all of us. And so I think it's a beautiful point that you mentioned, that you brought up, which has allowed us to speak about some related concepts, and also a call to action, which is, even if it's good, even if our lives are more or less okay, it's still not where it needs to be because Mashiach is still not here. And we have to really feel that there's something lacking in our own lives if there's still pain in the world. As long as there's any pain in the world, we should feel it, and it should bother us to the point that we're constantly striving to do something about it. Which leads me into next week's course, which is all about the idea of creating a better future with Mashiach and what it means. What's the Jewish take on the Messiah? How different is it from other versions that are out there? Maybe more when I say popular, I mean just by numbers, right? A version that more people believe in. What's the Jewish take? How do we make it happen? Is there hope for all of us? All discussed next week in This Can Happen. All right. I think that's it for today because it's a fairly straightforward reading. Tomorrow, Erev Shabbat, we're going to speak about tzarat on homes. The way tzarat, this lesion, can affect not just people, not just clothing, but even the stones of one's home. And we'll speak about what it looks like, what the protocol is, what the healing process is, and the silver lining and the secret blessing that comes from the mistakes that we make. All right, that's all tomorrow on DPP. All right, any questions, comments, additions, subtractions? That's it.
Oh, there's a lot of discussion, we've many days, Torah readings about this. Was it very prevalent, in the time?
It seems like it was important enough to take up like a whole section in Torah, almost a whole week exploring it. I guess. I mean, literally, there's the second of the two Torah portions called Metzora, which means the one afflicted with tzarat. It seems like it was a big deal. But you know what? Even if it wasn't so prevalent, and it seems like it was on some level, prevalent, but even if it wasn't, it's important enough to discuss because of, the importance of speaking nicely about each other. So even if it's just about the warning about it and the importance of really loving the other and wishing the best and not always looking to snipe at them. Dayenu, that would also be worthy of a Torah portion. It's a good warning. But it's interesting because some mitzvot, you get maybe a verse, and from, like we did last night, from an extra letter, from an extra word, we derive, all these heaps of laws. And other mitzvot are elaborated on, right? Who can fathom the ways of the author? But nonetheless, this is what we've got. All right, good. Great to see you both. And great, thank you for joining. Tomorrow we're back on 12 noon, high noon. Friday, DPP, be there or be square. You don't want to be square. So join me tomorrow for that. Tonight is Tanya, chapter 52. We continue chapter 52 as we continue on our march toward the conclusion of Tanya. We're not looking for the conclusion, but we're moving toward it. All right.
When did we start?
Good. Sorry?
When did we start learning Tanya? When did I start learning with you?
Wow.
It's more than 5 years.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I would put it at like 6 or 7.
Yeah.
But Mark, you've been consistently through.
Yeah.
This is going to be a true siyum, a true conclusion of the book.
For sure.
There's not many that have you and maybe a few others, maybe, that have been through. So very special. We're going to have to throw a Tanya party in a few weeks.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not sure what that is, but we'll come up with one. All right. Good to see you. And have a wonderful day. And we'll see you a little bit later, hopefully. And tomorrow night, we got a party. All right. We'll see you guys.
Bye.
Take
Yes.
care. All right. Pleasure.